Okay, we are now recording. So, hello, thank you for joining us for another Trailblazers interview. Whether you're joining through watching the video, through listening, reading the transcript, hearing about this from somebody else, I'm super grateful and glad that you are sharing your time and energy with us, and I hope you find something here that fuels you. Today, I am very, very honoured and excited to share with you my guest. Asali is a Black queer femme community healer and earthworker creating at Asali Earthwork. And her healing work is rooted in using self-care as a means to disrupt the systems of oppression and prioritise care for her community. I've been very, very lucky to have some amazing tarot readings from her and have been following her work and reading her insightful, brilliant and very accessible blog and wonderful card spreads for some time. I'm really excited to be speaking and sharing with her here today. So thank you very much and welcome.
Thank you for that awesome introduction. I'm happy to be here.
Thank you. Well, we really appreciate you sharing your time with us. And so for those who may not know, can you tell us how you came to this work and maybe describe it for people who aren't yet familiar with you?
Absolutely. And so I am an earth worker, a healer, a tarot reader, and I'm starting to accept writer as part of one of those things that I call myself. I came to this work as a result of facing the worst of me. I was in a really low place where, self-trust, self-confidence, self-love were all-time low. And I was lucky enough to have a spiritual teacher who saw me and was like, no, you deserve better. You can have better. You have to start making the choice to love yourself first, though, because that's where it all begins. And so she introduced me to my ancestors, or at least the process and the practice of working with them. As well as she got me into tea. There was a time in my life where I never had herbal tea or honey, hated it for no reason. And so it is amazing and weird that is now what I work with the most. But it happens like that sometimes. Sometimes the things that you're avoiding are exactly where you should be going, especially if you don't have a really good reason for avoiding them. So yeah, I started out with the tarot, and that really taught me how to trust myself, my perspective, what I was seeing, feeling, thinking, because I would often have it reflected in the cards. So they weren't really fixing anything for me. Sometimes it was just enough that if I'm having a bad day and I pull the 10 of Wands, I'm like, yes, I am having a bad day. I'm not just overreacting. And same for when I'm feeling good. And so being able to trust myself and what I think and what I feel.
Yes, it's so important. And, what I'm hearing in that, of some, just picking up one or two of the, the beautiful layers in that, is the teacher was able to actually see you.
Mm-hmm.
And then, introduce you to a mirror of the cards. So that you were then able, to daily validate and see yourself while living in an overculture which I imagine continually invalidates and invisibilizes, if that's a word, you.
It's a word. We'll go with that. I'm all for us inventing new words to name things, and our language is just as valid as anyone else's.
So true. Thank you. And so you shared a little bit you have shared beautifully on your blog about your journey with grief. And many of the people who are listening or watching or receiving this podcast may also be on their own grief journeys, whether that's around the loss of a loved one, how we kind of can traditionally think of grief, or when they're struggling with the loss of access to resources or abilities or many other pains. And I wonder if you can speak at all to drawing on the sacred arts when we are in a life crisis.
Absolutely. And so my introduction to grief as a healer was after my mother died. a year ago. And a loss like that really just, it shakes your core, absolutely. I am thankful that, I had an ancestral practice, though, because that enabled for me to look at it as learning to connect with her on a different level, and understanding that loss isn't always just loss. It sometimes encourages a different perspective, a different way of knowing, a different way of being, and that has value and it's relevant. It also introduced me to the full breadth of my emotions and understanding that, I went through a really weird place where, not weird anymore, it feels right, where, there were places where I felt relief, and there were places where I felt hurt, and there are places where I felt joy at being able to connect on this level, and there are places where I was absolutely brokenhearted. And I got to understand that all of those things can inhabit my body at the same time, and it's not that one is more valid than the other. And being able to rely on ancestral practice and connection was really what got me through it. Of course, supported by tarot and plants that I worked with. I drank a lot of tea. And just, learning a new way of being and a new way of connecting to her. And then it also it helped me recognize my other griefs or losses. For the person I was before I was suicidal, for the person I was when I was lowest, for all those little losses that we don't always acknowledge. It brought them right center. And, I began the healing process because I started grieving for them. And so I'm very thankful, even if it hurts, I am thankful for the way that grief journey helped me see so much of myself as well.
And thank you for sharing not only your practices around it, but also the way that you've been journeying with grief. And yes, so much of what you say. I mean, I also volunteer doing grief counselling. And so often what we see is people who have been referred to disorders for a specific named grief, but actually what they're bringing is all of the losses. And sometimes they can name them, and sometimes they have a sense that at a certain age, something happened at that time in their life, and they may not have, access to exactly what was there, but something. And it really puts me in mind as you speak about it of Dr. Clarissa Pinkola Aristides' process of making the descansos, where she says by the time a woman is 20, that she may have experienced innumerable losses. And that often they haven't been recognized, named. Actually, so she kind of gets a big sheet of paper and actually puts, crosses, kind of actually lays down whether this is a Christian symbol, whether this is X marks the spot, this is where it happened, this is where the star is. But there's something about actually naming what we've experienced, because so often we put them kind of in a sack.
Yeah.
And the sack just gets bigger and bigger.
Oh, that's so deep. Thank you for mentioning that practice. It's so right on time, because I was just working with someone on their reading, and we drew the 8 of Knives card, and the picture of the card was someone wrapped up in rope, obviously not able to move, and knives kind of sticking the rope down. And one of the practices I suggested for them was for them to, give a name to each of those 8 knives. And so, in the act of pulling that out, you are actually working with something that feels more concrete than this abstract idea of, I must heal through my grief. And I think what you said was so important. Marginalized folk often have all kinds of grief that needs to be worked through, all kinds of losses that are named and unnamed, and we just carry that, and sometimes we mistake our ability to carry that for what our purpose in life is. And so I think that's really a beautiful way of, thank you for mentioning that, because it really just brought that on to the fore.
No problem. And what you say sounds so beautiful and important with naming them, and there is such power, as we know, on so many levels in naming things, especially what is so often unnamed. And it does also put me in mind, there was a theorist, a poet called Robert Bly, who wrote a book called The Little Book of the Human Shadow. I actually don't know if you come across, but what I really liked about it was he said that humans have a bag, and it's the bag on our back, and every time a part of ourselves is seen as not acceptable or likable or is allowed in a space, then if we're vulnerable or if we are relying on that person for something we need, he's talking about it generally in terms of often as infants, so for our primary caregiver. But I think we're all going to do it, especially if we've got multiple marginalizations. In so many interactions with people of privilege, we can feel very, very marginalized. And so he says that you take these pieces of yourself and you put them in a sack. But when you put them in a sack, you also lose contact with their power, as well as the actual wholeness and totality of you. So when you're talking about your grief as well, there's something there for me about you are reclaiming all the sensations in your body and your emotional palette, not just maybe the few that we're left with that are considered socially acceptable.
I love that. I'm going to sit with that for a bit. That piece about when you put them in that sack, you're also not working with them. You've lost that contact to that piece of yourself that is necessary. That's beautiful. Thank you.
Thank you. And speaking of, working with tarot with this very deep healing, I've loved your work on representation in the tarot. And I've started working with the Numinous Tarot. And after, love the Numinous Tarot.
So good.
So good. It's just, I didn't realize how much it would impact me seeing people like me in the cards. And it was one of the tomes. And I looked at it and there were lots of people in the library. And I was like, actually everybody's abled in this card. I'm like, it's okay, there's other cards. And then I noticed, and people actually had sticks. And my whole body just shifted. It was like, I am here. I am in this place. And after an amazing reading from you, I'm waiting for my own deck of the Dust to Onyx.
Yay!
So exciting. So can you share a little more about representation in the tarot and how it impacts our healing?
Absolutely. That moment right there that you described of seeing yourself and feeling like, oh, there. And I think when I was interviewing Noelle for Little Red Tarot, I think one of the things that I left with was, there is space in the magic for all of us. And sometimes it takes being able to see that. Mirrors are so important. And so that moment right there of you being able to see yourself and feel that body and spirit just release, like, oh, me too. I get to be here. That's it. That's the whole purpose of the project. It started off with not being seen. I tell the story often. I walked into a new age shop with another femme of color. And, we brought ourselves there and we just picked it out because it was the only one we knew about. But we were looking at the tarot decks. We both had the Mythical Goddess Tarot, which is beautiful. And we wanted another deck that had that level of, being able to see ourselves. And the person who was working there, along with following us around the store, like we were going to take something, when we asked them where are the tarot decks with queer folks, with people of color, with disabled people, fat people? Where are the cards? And the response we got was, there's just not that many because, that's not who practices the tarot. And I looked at my friend, she looked at me, and we were like, but we're here. And so I knew there had to be something out there, something more. And so I'm very grateful to have in this work, and starting that list, come across and had beautiful conversations with folks who are doing the work. Noelle with the Numinous Tarot being one of them. That's a project I fell in love with instantly. Courtney with the Dust to Onyx, Egan with the Delta Enduring Tarot, the Slow Holler Project, and all the people who worked on that. These are so important. It's so important that they exist. It's so important that we get to see ourselves, because sometimes what we need is that affirmation of reflection to even begin the healing. That's really what it is. It's an affirmation that, I see you, you see me, we see each other. And I think that's absolutely crucial to anyone's healing.
Totally. And I think it's so easy for our magical practices to reinforce the dominant culture.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so healing when we have these tools which don't do that, and which actually are a form of joy and resistance in themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And speaking of that, so much of the healing and empowerment in what we might call the dominant wellness culture, which being a predominantly white, cishet, ableist, capitalist culture, is very, very individualistic. And I know you've spoken in your work about healing through radical self and community care.
Mm-hmm.
You could speak a little bit about that?
Absolutely. And so very recently I listened to a podcast Dory Midnight was on, and they are an incredible healer. And they were actually working with reframing the idea of healing. And it really resonated with me because healing, the way that the dominant culture puts it forth, is that somewhere you're supposed to be magically better and you arrive at a point. So Dory was saying that, I'm really not cool with, the constant concentration on healing, because sometimes people don't get better for whatever value of better that the dominant world puts out. So, they reframed it as connection. That being the goal. And whether it's connection with yourself and your spirit and deepening that connection, whether it's connection with others, connection. And I just was like, oh, and I'm actually rethinking, the entire way I've approached healing. I wanted to be, so I began my blog mostly for myself, and as it grew is when I realized that being able to be soft and vulnerable in that space could help somebody else be soft and vulnerable. It's the whole idea of that mirror again. Mm-hmm. And so if I heal myself, or if I connect deeply to myself, maybe someone else who is going through something similar or different finds a way, or inspiration or motivation to connect to themselves in a deeper way. And so that was the first kind of stage of my work. It was really about, I got some mess to work on. Maybe you can come along the journey too, as you work on whatever your mess is. And then when I was ready to work with others, it was very important to me that I do it in a way that was accessible. And so, being a Black queer femme, I understand that though that being my community, we don't have access to all the $1,000 let's go on a journey programs, and we don't have access to spaces that have us in them. Sometimes it's straight up, there's no one who is like us. And also, that our individual journeys are different, and that's okay, and that's beautiful. And so it was very important for me to have a place and do work that connected with folks, as many folks as possible, on as many levels as possible, whether that was introducing sliding scale, whether that was looking for work and pieces that I could share in Signal Boost that, it may not be my particular perspective, but it's someone else's perspective and they don't get to be seen. So that's where I come at that from.
I'm literally my brain is going, healing this connection. What do I think healing? And I thought that it was curing, because I really believe that there's a difference between healing and curing. There is so much focus on fixing.
Yes.
And, prettifying and polishing and negating things. And sorry, go on.
No, go ahead.
And all of these things in these ways. And so I really love the idea of healing as connection.
Mm-hmm.
And what I'm hearing you say is that some of this is being alongside people.
Yes, exactly. Yes.
Which I love, because I think there is something so wonderful about being alongside each other as we're doing our journeys. And too often I do see a lot of, I did it this specific way, and so this will work for everybody.
Mm-hmm.
And, for my healing journey, way back when, I tried all of the ones that I could get access to. I tried all of them. And it was times when people were kind of like, they were diagnosed with something that I'd been diagnosed with, and then they did X, Y, and Z, and they were running marathons. And I was like, how are you doing that? I have been bedbound, and so I not only have muscle wastage, I now have, bone issues and stuff. Literally, even if the disease went tomorrow like that, which it quite frankly didn't, I still would be so deconditioned and sick, from having lived with it for so long, that I would not be magically running down a beach. And so I think it's fantastic instead kind of being alongside each other as this journey. So I am sitting with that. And I'm just wondering, can you talk to us a little bit about the words caring for myself, not self-indulgence, it's self-preservation, and that is an act of political warfare, from Audre Lorde?
So, just blessings to an ancestor, Audre Lorde. And so that particular quote I chose because it's so often quoted to justify a kind of individualistic curing style of healing and self-care. And I was reminded recently that Audre Lorde actually died through a lack of access to healing resources, health resources. And, there is a continuing pattern of marginalized activists dying. And it's not because they don't understand self-care, it's because they don't have access to care, and not just self-care, community care. Because again, that connection piece. And so, it's in stages. So for that quote, for me, it's a reminder from my teachers who told me that, one of the ways you can sustain yourself is to learn to give from the overflow. And so thinking of yourself as a cup or a fountain. A fountain doesn't run until it has more than enough water to begin overflowing, and then you get those beautiful streams of water. But if it doesn't have enough, or if it has just enough to kind of sit on the bottom, there's no fountain. And so learning to see myself as, a fountain. I need what I have. And then as I get more than what I have, then it's my part to share that beauty and magic with others. But I cannot do that part if I'm not filled up.
Yes. And it's such a beautiful image. And I think it's so important. I don't know whether you experience, obviously I have different marginalizations and I have my own privileges that I'm experiencing. But my experience is often that I am expected to educate people with more privilege than me about my marginalizations. And they will not see the marginalizations until they are of use to them in terms of education. And so I say, well, I can't do that because kind of I have to get home on public transport and I have to be aware, have enough spoons to be safe and keep myself safe when I'm doing that. And so that means I can't explain what cis means to you, but you can look at it on your smartphone. And rather than ask me to tell you in for like 20, 45 minutes. But so I love the image, where one could really say, you know what, actually, I don't have the resources to do that.
And I think that's so important for marginalized folk to implement those boundaries fiercely and forcefully. Because, everybody's going to be trying to breach them. And it's hard for folks with privilege, and even in my own privileges, to hear that. But, sometimes that's the real. You have to go out and do the work for yourself and not expect the person who you are by default oppressing, since you're not working with your privilege, to do it for you. And so that emotional labor is taxing, and it's something that marginalized folks are forced to carry. Like, that's one of the things in our bag, that responsibility to educate, to explain, to beg someone for empathy, essentially. When really it's their responsibility to go out and do it for themselves, and when they learn, to teach other privileged people. And the reality is that some of us are called to do the extra work of actually being the ones who educate and teach. And if we are doing that work, like you, like me, in our particular contexts, we have to be well enough to do that work. Otherwise, we're not going to be able to sustain that bottom line.
Yes, when I was first, I'm just moving aside because the sunlight's really on my face.
No problem.
Thank you. When I was first diagnosed as a teenager, sometimes people would see my wheelchair and they say, "What's wrong with you?" Because super useful question.
Yeah, great.
Please, let me tell you all about my body. Never something I never would say. And sometimes people would cry when I told them, because they'd ask about my prognosis, and then they would cry. And I literally felt like sometimes I would say, "Do you know what? Actually, I will charge you to kind of listen to you about and do the labor for you about my." I at the time I actually wasn't therapeutically trained. I did feel like handing out cards and going, "Do you know what? There's a waiting list for this. This is actually." But also, I obviously couldn't do it with people who were upset about me, because that didn't really make sense. But it's I think valuing the labor, which is so often both grasped at and simultaneously devalued, is this kind of difficult paradox.
And it's made more difficult by those of us who understand that, capitalism is not the answer. And also, seeing as how we all have to live through this paradigm until we take it apart, let's just tap into that old ancient idea that has run the world perfectly for longer than we've been here, of a balance of exchange.
Mm-hmm.
So the give and take, it has to come through. And so understanding that, one of the ways that I require that exchange is if I'm doing emotional labor for you, you are going to, return that in some way. And because I have to survive in this world, sometimes that way is money.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Or, as we continue to, pull at the strings of capitalism until it unravels, sometimes that can be barter or trade of some kind. But we have to, part of connection is understanding that the connection is only sustained if there's a flow of energy both ways.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And the reality of power structures means that those people with privilege might have to flow a lot more to make up for it. I mean, that's the reality.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so sometimes I even think about that fountain metaphor, and I say those streams of water, when I'm full up and I'm overflowing, those streams of water are how I work with my privilege. And so that's what I put out into the world as, I have the privilege. So as a responsibility, it is, I got to work with others. I got to share with others. I got to stand in for others. I got to speak up with and for as necessary. And so, the ultimate goal of self-care for me isn't I'm good. It's I'm good, so I have the strength to ensure that my community is good.
Yes. Mm-hmm. And it does make me, I don't remember this quote correctly, I don't think, but it was something like, while there is an underclass, I am of it. While there is a criminal element, I am in it. And while there is a soul in it, I am not free.
Mm-hmm. Love that. Thank you.
And you just think, yes. So I love how the fountain metaphor goes both ways.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so just as we come to the end, I just wanted to ask, do you have a favorite book or website at the moment?
Yes, right now I am all the way in love with Emergent Strategy from Adrienne Maree Brown.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I'm all the way in love with that. It's really helping me reshape my approach to community work, to healing work. And I love that, at the very beginning, the metaphor is plants and how they're connected and how they help each other flow, unseen and seen. So yeah, I'm absolutely in love with that book right now.
I am also loving it. I'm moving through it very slowly. I'm doing that thing where I read like a paragraph. I'm like, right, 2 weeks. I'm just gonna kind of just process that. I just gonna lie down now because I have to kind of. It's so, some books that are so beautiful are just so deep, but it's so good. So.
Oh, I hear that. I haven't finished it, and I've had it for about 2 months now or something. But it's like everything she writes is so rich. I need time.
Which I think it's really good to process that and to do that, because I have previously I was able to kind of just gulp books, and I could gulp it and then I could regurgitate it, but I hadn't actually assimilated it.
Mm-hmm.
And it's that kind of that process of taking a sip and assimilating it and letting it kind of filter through and come out into the world through me. So do you have a historical person who you love or find heartening?
Every Black woman poet there has ever been. Okay. Because like their magic in the words just comes through so deeply. So June Jordan, Audre Lorde. Right now I'm really loving Alexis Pauline Gumbs. She does such crucial work of ancestral remembering and connection. So yeah, Black women poets, I love them.
Fantastic. And there's some new ones to me there that I'm going to check out.
Yes, definitely, please.
Thank you. And can I ask, what's the smallest action that's made the biggest shift for you?
ritual of making tea, and choosing which herbs I'm working with, and acknowledging that this is something good I'm doing for myself. It's comforting, it's energizing, it's healing, it's grounding, depending on how I decide to approach it and what I decide to put in the tea.
Mm-hmm.
And also, having that moment to drink, even if I'm taking a sip on it, at work in my travel mug, like that little moment is like, I'm doing this for me. Just this one thing.
I love it. And from reading your words about tea, I literally spent the last winter making tea. Seriously, thinking, I was like, yes, and so I followed some new recipes, and I'm very lucky that my college is an apothecary with all the jars of herbs, and they'll weigh them out for you, and some of them are just kind of like pennies, kind of, especially calendula. You seem to get a lot of calendula for like kind of like 50 pence or something, which is really cool. So, and obviously, supplementing with herbs from my garden, and it has just felt so accessible and so easy to dismiss how powerful it is. I've been working on not doing that and on just being with, resisting the idea that the thing that is healing is the thing which is expensive or exotic or far from me or taught by somebody who has more credentials or education than me, and kind of this whole idea where the healing is out there and where actually the healing can be right in front of me, like in my garden or in my cup.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's everything, to be able to see that. And folks are always asking me, like, so which ones do I take? And I don't have this and I don't have that. I'm like, go with the ones that are around you and that you have access to. So when I started drinking tea, my teacher was like, go drink rosemary tea to start with. And it's like she knew. I'm convinced that Spirit had told her, because, I was like, where do I find this herbal tea? And rosemary isn't in stores. I can't access it or even save up to get it. But at the time, the college I went to just had a gang of rosemary growing everywhere. And I had never noticed it until I noticed it. And so I literally, maybe this might not have been the best way because I don't know what was in the soil, but I just trusted the plant, and I snipped off some stems, went home, washed them, and put them in boiling water. And that was tea. And so, learning to see what's already around you. You don't have to reach for, I think the new spiritual community online especially is all about, what can I get? What can I buy? I need more things. And, it's nice to have things. I have a tarot collection that I keep saying that I need to slim down and thin down. But it's also important to see what's already around you and integrate that.
Yes, totally. And I always end by asking for an idea of one thing that the listener might be able to do now to take our conversation into action and beginning to incorporate aspects of the discussion into their lives, should they wish to, and or that they might wish to reflect upon. So I don't know if you have any ideas. I mean, we do have tea, which is like a really fantastic.
Yes, definitely drink tea. And I don't know, I was thinking about this earlier. Take 5 minutes in your day, at least 5 minutes, it can be more, of course, to be kind to yourself. Whatever that looks like. If it looks like having some tea, if it looks like laying down, if it looks like closing your eyes, just have 5 minutes at least every day where you are kind to yourself, where there's no presence, or at least you're working towards no presence of judgment and doubt and fear. Just have 5 minutes where love, kindness, compassion, healing is all you are, feeling. And, let it grow, of course, until maybe one day you'll have a whole day that is dedicated to being kind to yourself. That's harder to do, but maybe it can be done. But it starts with just, at least 5 minutes. Just show yourself some kindness, whatever that looks like.
And I love, thank you, I love that. I love, whatever that looks like. That's going to be accessible for different people in different ways. For some people, it's going to be maybe really easy to grasp. For some people, it's going to be exploration and adventure in what kindness feels and looks like to them. Exciting. I'm going to be doing that. So,
awesome.
Thank you. So how can people find out more about your work?
Absolutely. I am at asaliearthwork.com. And Asali Earthwork is my handle on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, and of course my website. And so it's Asali, ASALI, Earthwork, EARTHWORK, all one word, .com. And yeah, come find me, join me, chat with me. I love interacting with folks and connecting. And, really reaching for connection as the motivation.
Well, thank you so much for connecting with us here today, and thank you to everybody who is participating with us. I'm so glad to be connecting with you, and I look forward to more Trailblazer interviews and more healing times with you. And you'll be able to find more Trailblazer interviews on gracequantock.com, which is RACEQUANTOCK.com, and keep trailblazing.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Bye.